Greetings, my fellow mathematicians. This is MathMarks here with our video on fractions. On this video, we're going to be looking at doing different operations with fractions, those being adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So let's just get right into it. So let's say we have two fractions. Let's go with 2/3 and say we want to add 1/3, right? Now we know the top numbers are called the numerators and the bottom numbers are called the denominators. So when we add, if they have the same denominator or the bottom number, then all we need to do is add the top numbers. So the math we would do might look something like this. We'd actually be doing 2 plus 1 over 3, which would give us 3 over 3. But in many situations, our denominators won't be the same. So if we look at 2/3 plus, we say 1/6, then we have a problem because we don't add the denominators like we would do the numerators. In this case, we have to change one of our denominators to be the same as the other one. In this case, we have to find the least common multiple between the two denominators. So if we look at all the multiples of 3, we have 3, 6, 9, and so on. In 6, we have 6, 12, 18, and so on. Now, the least common multiple that 6 and 3 share is 6, because 6 times 1 is 6 and 3 times 2 is 6. That's the lowest number that they share. So in order to change our 2/3 to be over 6, we have to multiply the top and the bottom number in 2/3 by 3 by 2. So we would do that by this. And in this case, this would give us 4 over 6. And now, since we have two 6's, we can add them. Now let's finish adding the 1/6. And that's going to end us with 5/6. Now we had to get a little glimpse of the multiplying fractions, because as you can see in this case, when we multiply fractions, the 2/3 times the 2/2, we do indeed multiply both the tops and the bottom numbers and see what we get. But then let's move on to subtraction and division. When you're using the same numbers, it's really going to be the same thing. So since the denominators are the same when we're doing subtraction, it's really going to look like this. And if we solve that, it's simply going to be 1/3. So when you're subtracting, same thing with addition, you only add or subtract the numerators, and if the denominators are the same. But in another case where we have this, we're going to have to do that multiplication again in order to get the 1/3 to be over 6. So we know that 3 times 2 equals 6. So we're going to have to multiply the fraction by 2 over 2. And that's going to give us 2/6. So now we can do the original subtraction we wanted to do before in 5/6 minus 1/3. Or in this case, it'll be 2/6. And that's going to give us 3 over 6. And that's the basics of that. Now finally, let's try division. Just like we did with multiplication, division requires action on both numerator and the denominator. So we could try to use these same numbers again. Now we're going to do the same thing. So 2 divided by 1 is going to be 2. And 3 divided by 3 is equal to 1. And now we've stumbled on a fraction where the denominator is 1. And this leads us into another concept called simplifying. This is when we want the numerator and denominator to have no common multiples. We make sure that it's as simple as it can be and the smallest fraction it can be. In this case, since we know that fraction is just a division equation, 2, in this case, it'll be 2 divided by 1, and we know that 2 over 1 is the same thing as just writing 2. Now, in another case, if we want to look at a fraction like 4/6, we can simplify this further because 4 and 6 both share the common multiple 2. So let's try reducing it. We can go ahead and use our division for this. So just like when we multiply to make the fraction bigger by multiplying or dividing by the same number on top and bottom, you want to do the same thing with division. So we know that they share a common multiple of 2, so let's go ahead and divide by that. And we are going to result with 2/3. Now this lets us know that 4/6 and 2/3 are indeed the same thing. They're just different ways of writing each other. 2/3 is the absolute simple version of writing 4/6. And when we divide by this 2/2, we know that if we would do the division, it would actually equal 1. And when you divide or multiply by 1, you know you're not changing the number at all. But we put these numbers over the fractions so we can make them look different, but their value is actually still the same. And that is really the basics of operations with fractions, but let's try another example. In this case, we're going to use improper fractions where the numerators are bigger than the denominators, and nothing's really going to change. So let's take a look. Now we see when we want to add, the denominators are still the same. So even though this 4/3 over here is an improper fraction because the 4 is greater than 3, we can still add it like we would normally. We add the numerators to be 5 and keep the denominators the same since they're the same number when we're adding or subtracting. So if we were to subtract this, we would do the same thing and it would be 3/3. And we know that we could simplify this to equal 1. Because they both 3 and 3 share the common multiple of 3. And we can do the division equation. So let's try another. Let's go for multiplication. Now for multiplication, as I said before, we're going to multiply both the numerators by each other. So that's going to be 4 times 1 to be 4. And then we're going to multiply the denominators. 3 times 6 is 18. Now 4/18 can be simplified because 4 and 18 share the common multiple 2. So if we divide them by 2/2, let's see what we get. Two ninths. That's going to be the simplified version of our answer. Because when we divide by that 2/2, we know it's the same thing as dividing by 1. We're just making the 4/18 look different, but the value still remains the same. Alrighty, let's try one more division example. Let's go with 10/6 divided by 5/2. Despite both of them being improper fractions, nothing really changes. We're going to do the same thing. So 10 divided by 5 will be 2. And 6 divided by 2 will be 3. And that's going to be our final answer because 2 and 3 don't share any common multiples other than 1. And that won't help us. So yes, that is the very basics of operation with fractions, including improper fractions, as well as simplifying. Now I want to do a little bit more with simplifying because sometimes figuring out those least common multiples may not be super easy. So let's say we have two fractions such as 1/4 and we want to add 2/3. So we have to find the least common multiple between 4 and 3. So something that can help us with this is when we write out their multiples. So for 4, its multiples include 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and so on. For 3, we have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and so on. So if we look at this, eventually we might come across more numbers that be the same, but the first number that we see in both of them is 12. that they share. And so we want to get both of our denominators to be 12. So when we look at 1/4, in order to get the denominator by 12, we'll have to multiply by 3 over 3. So we're going to write that at the top up here. So 1/4 times 3 over 3 would be 3 over 12. And that's the same thing as 1/4. We want to do the same thing for 2/3. We'd have to multiply by 4 over 4 in order to get the 3 to be 12. So if we look at 2/3 times 4 over 4, 2 times 4 is 8, and 3 times 4 is 12. So now we can rewrite our original addition for 3/12 and 8/12. And that's going to give us 11/12 as our final answer. And 11 and 12 don't share any common multiples. If you want to do that, you can, or don't share any common factors. I'm going to go into that as well, just to make sure we don't get it confused with least common multiple for when we do our simplifying. So when we're looking at this 11/12 here, we want to look at all the numbers that we can get to multiply to 11 as well as 12. Now we know for 11, we know we can multiply 1 times 11, but that's really it. For 12, we could do 1 times 12. But we can also do 2 times 6 or 3 times 4. Now this is when we're looking at the greatest common factor. Now the greatest common factor that 11 and 12 have are both 1. That's the only one that they share. But multiplying or dividing by 1 won't change the number. It will still be 11 over 12. So we know that that's as simplified as it can be. But let's try another example. Now say we want to simplify 4/16. Now we want to look at the factors of 4, which we know can be 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. For 16, we have 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and then 4 times 4. Now the greatest number that they both share is 4. You see the 4 here, that can be used to make the 4, and a 4 here that can be used to make 16. So since we know that they both share 4, and 4 is the greatest common factor they have, because they both also share 2, but since 4 is greater, we want to use that so we can get it as simplified as possible, as quickly as possible. So now we can divide by the 4 over 4, and that's going to give us 1/4. And this, again, this telling us that 4/16 and 1/4 are the same number. It's just we're writing them different ways. But their values are still the same. Thank you again, mathematicians, for watching. I hope this helps, and keep tuning in for more helpful math videos. Thank you.